Snow fell so thick it swallowed the horizon whole. In that white silence, a mercenary team of legendary brutality men who had erased an entire battalion in 12 minutes flat moved toward a sealed border town. They did not know they were being watched. No one heard the measured breathing on the frozen ridge above. No one saw the unmarked rifle lying still in the snow. Not until the first shot cracked across the valley. One man dropped, then a second, and for the first time in their careers, that team of elite killers felt something they had never expected to feel: fear. The town of Varden's Crossing had no military value worth speaking of. It sat at the base of the Caro Pass, in the high northern range, 400 souls pressed between mountains that cared nothing for politics or borders. In summer, it was a waypoint for hikers. In winter, it was a trap. The road in was the road out, and right now both directions were buried under 3 feet of new snow, with more coming. Captain Drew Halstead had delivered the intelligence briefing himself, in person, to the regional command post 4 miles east. He was a careful man, not given to exaggeration, and he had chosen his words slowly. The Callaway Group, 14 operators, active in 9 conflicts across 3 continents. Their signature: overwhelming precision in the opening seconds of engagement, leaving adversaries no window to respond. They had never lost an operation. They had never left a witness. The regional commander, a heavy-set colonel named Frank Ostrovsky, had listened without interrupting. Then he had looked at the weather reports and made the calculation every commander eventually makes: the math of acceptable losses versus operational risk. The road was impassable for armored vehicles. Air support was grounded. The 2 infantry platoons stationed at the forward post were green, under-equipped, and would be massacred before they found their footing in a whiteout engagement against operators of that caliber. Halstead had watched Ostrovsky sign the withdrawal order. He had said nothing. There was nothing to say. Varden's Crossing would be undefended by midnight. What no one had accounted for, because there was no file for it, no record in any database that Ostrowski could access, was the figure already positioned on the North Ridge. She had been there since 2 in the morning. Lying flat in a shallow depression she had carved herself in the ice-crusted snow, her body temperature regulated by discipline alone, her heartbeat slow and deliberate as a metronome. The rifle beside her bore no manufacturer's stamp, no serial number, no unit insignia. It had been stripped of everything that might identify it, and yet it was immaculate, every component seated with the kind of precision that came not from factory assembly, but from 1,000 hours of intimate, patient care. Her name was not in the briefing. Her name was not in any briefing. When Halstead later described what he had eventually pieced together about her presence, the most accurate thing he could say was this: she did not belong to any unit. She had not been dispatched. She had simply decided to be there. The Callaway Group did not operate on fear. They operated on information, and at the moment of entry into the Caro Pass approach, their information was excellent. 14 operators in 4-man fire teams, moving in staggered formation through the blizzard, thermal imaging mounted on their helmets, acoustic sensors trailing at 100-meter intervals to map sound origination. They had done this in worse conditions. The snow was an inconvenience, not an obstacle. The team leader was a man named Garrett Novak, 41 years old, former Tier 1, 8 years in private contracting. Compact, methodical, with pale eyes that registered everything and revealed nothing. He had built the Callaway Group from scratch into something that governments quietly paid extraordinary sums to employ. Their specialty, the thing that made them genuinely dangerous beyond their raw lethality, was their counter-sniper capability. Every operator in the group had completed advanced sniper detection training. Novak himself had personally overseen the elimination of 6 long-range shooters in the field. When the tactical report had mentioned a possible sniper presence in the Varden's Crossing area described as unconfirmed, likely a local partisan with a hunting rifle, Novak had assigned it a threat rating of 2 out of 10. He had briefed his people accordingly. One shooter, fixed position, probably terrified, almost certainly untrained for engagement at this level. They would locate the muzzle flash with the thermal drones, triangulate within 30 seconds, and have operators on the position within 4 minutes. Standard protocol. They had done it 14 times. At 0317 hours, The lead fire team entered the mouth of the pass approach. Wind chill was -31. Visibility had dropped to 60 meters. The drones were up, their thermal sensors sweeping the ridgeline in overlapping arcs. The first shot came from a direction that none of the sensors had flagged. It was not the sound of the shot that registered first. It was the absence of sound from operator Marcus Webb, who had been speaking into his comms and simply stopped. He went down in the snow without a cry. By the time the team processed what had happened too, perhaps 3 seconds, they had already lost the engagement initiative. Novak barked for positions. His people moved, but there was no muzzle flash, no thermal bloom on any sensor feed, no echo from the valley walls that could be triangulated. Nothing. The shot had traveled 940 meters. In still air at standard temperature, that was a significant but achievable distance for an experienced shooter. In a crosswind gusting to 37 kilometers per hour, with temperature-induced air density variations at altitude, with the target moving in irregular terrain, it was something else entirely. The arithmetic of it was almost offensive in its difficulty. Every variable had to be calculated, integrated, and compensated for in real time, with a margin for error measured in fractions of a centimeter. The woman on the ridge had not used a rangefinder. She had not needed one. She had spent 40 minutes in the darkness before the team arrived, simply listening to the wind, to the way it moved through the rock faces, to the frequency shifts that told her what the gust patterns would do in the next 30 seconds. By the time Novak's lead element stepped into the pass approach, she had already built the complete ballistic picture in her mind. The shot had not been fired at where Marcus Webb was standing. It had been fired at where Marcus Webb would be standing in the 1.3 seconds it took the round to travel. The thermal drones swept the ridge for the second time. She had known they would. She had positioned herself in a natural seam in the rock face, where the geothermal gradient from the underlying stone partially masked her body heat signature. It was a technique that required precise knowledge of the terrain, knowledge she had acquired over 3 days of quiet observation before the operation began. The drones found nothing that registered as human. Novak ordered the lead drone forward for a closer pass. It climbed, adjusting altitude, its sensor array active on all frequencies. It had covered perhaps 200 meters of new ground when it simply vanished from the feed. No impact warning. No malfunction code. One moment it was transmitting, the next it was gone. She had waited until the drone was side-on to her position, the smallest possible cross-section, the least protected angle of the rotor housing. The round had entered the main processor cavity through a gap in the airframe that measured 11 millimeters. She had measured it herself 3 months earlier, when she had acquired an identical model for study. 2 more shots followed in the next 90 seconds. Both struck. No one on the ground had heard a suppressed report. No one had seen a flash. The Callaway group was down to 11 operators, 1 drone unit, and a tactical picture that had just become something none of them had prepared for. Novak pulled his team back 200 meters and held position. In 10 years of operations, he had learned to distinguish between a problem and a different category of problem. This was the second kind. Novak's response was textbook. He split the group into 3 elements, 1 holding the current position as a fixed reference, 1 pushing left through the lower slope to flank any fixed sniper position, 1 pushing right along the base of the ridge to cut off retreat routes. It was the correct tactical response to a static long-range threat. He briefed it clearly, allocated frequencies, set time on target parameters. His people moved with the precision he had trained into them over years. The flaw in the response was the assumption it was built on. She was not static. She had never been static. The ridge position had been her opening location, the place from which she took the first shots before the enemy could recalibrate. From the moment she had fired, she had been moving, low and patient, through a series of secondary positions she had prepared and memorized in advance. Each position offered a different firing angle, a different terrain signature, a different relationship to the wind. She moved between them not in straight lines but in arcs, using folds in the terrain that did not register on any standard topographic map because they were too small, too irregular, too close to the surface of the rock. The left flank element, led by a former ranger named Cole Dempsey, pushed through the lower slope with their thermals active and their spacing tight. They were good. They moved correctly and communicated cleanly. Dempsey called terrain markers as he passed them, building a mental map of the area in real time. He was 40 meters from the base of the ridge's first major outcrop, when the shot came from his right, not from the ridge above him, but from the valley floor, at an angle that put him broadside to a position he had already cleared. Dempsey went down. His 2 remaining team members scattered for cover and called contact. The bearing they reported was inconsistent with any of the ridge positions Novak had charted. He stared at his map overlay for 2 full seconds before understanding arrived like cold water. She had moved behind them. She had been ahead of his flanking element before it even began its movement. She had not chosen a position and defended it. She had mapped his response, predicted his tactical decision, and was already waiting at the point where it would fail. Novak ordered all elements to halt and hold. The blizzard pressed down. In the white silence, he heard his own breathing and counted his remaining people. 9. She was not the prey in this equation. She had never been the prey. Varden's Crossing had 411 residents. Of those, 263 had managed to leave in the 36 hours after the regional authority issued its evacuation advisory. The remaining 148 either could not leave the elderly, the sick, families without vehicles, or would not, for the same reasons people anywhere refuse to abandon the only home they have ever known. The Callaway Group had not been sent to the town for its real estate. They had been sent for one specific person, a woman named Irene Callahan, 63 years old, a retired communications analyst who had spent the last 3 years compiling, in meticulous and documented detail, a record of financial transactions connecting certain government contractors to certain decision-makers in the regional authority structure. Irene Callahan was not a spy. She was not an activist. She was a retired woman with a methodical mind and a profound inability to look away from things that disturbed her. She had told no one what she was doing. She had stored everything on physical media in her kitchen. The woman on the ridge had learned about Irene Callahan 6 days ago through channels that no longer officially existed. She had not been hired to protect her. No one had asked. She had simply made a decision, the way she always made decisions, by identifying what was right and accepting the consequences. The last time she had made a decision of that kind, it had cost her everything that could be officially taken from her. The unit she had belonged to, a designation that no longer appeared in any public record, had run an operation that she had been told was one thing and had turned out to be something else entirely. She had reported it. Then she had watched the people she reported it to make it disappear, along with her service record, her security clearance, and her name from any official roster. They had not taken her skills. Skills do not exist in databases. Lying in the snow above Varden's Crossing, she was not thinking about any of that. She was thinking about a woman named Irene Callahan, asleep in a house 200 meters from the north edge of town, unaware that 14 professionals had just entered the pass approach to find her. She was thinking about the 147 other people in that town who would be in the way. She exhaled, steady, slow. Novak was not a man who panicked, but he was a man who understood data. The data currently in front of him was telling him something he did not want to hear. 9 operators, 3 dead, 2 incapacitated, 1 drone destroyed, 0 confirmed fix on the shooter's position across 7 engagement attempts. He opened a direct channel to headquarters. The debrief took 11 minutes. He gave them the engagement parameters, distance, conditions, weapon signature, movement pattern, the way she had repositioned between shots without triggering any of their sensor arrays. The way she had appeared to anticipate his tactical response before he had broadcast it. The way the drone had been struck through its smallest structural vulnerability at a range and angle that required pre-acquired technical intelligence on the airframe. There was a long silence on the channel. Then the intelligence coordinator, a careful, senior man named Burton Greer, said, "Pull everything you have on a program designated Ashfield. It was formally closed 7 years ago. Run the shooter profile against the last known operational signature." Novak ran the query. The Ashfield program had been a specialized long-range interdiction initiative, classified, small, and eventually deemed too operationally independent to maintain within conventional command structures. It had been dissolved. Its records had been archived under restricted access. Its single most accomplished graduate had been listed as separated from service under administrative grounds. The call sign in the archive was simply WREN. Novak looked at the engagement data again. The pattern of shots. The selection of targets. The way she had taken out the communications operator first, not the team leader, not the most physically imposing target, but the man holding the long-range relay unit. She had understood the command structure before she fired a single round. He keyed the channel to his remaining elements. His voice was flat. Change of assessment. We are not hunting an asset. We are engaged with a graduate-level operator with full counter-sniper doctrine and active territorial awareness. Treat every position as compromised. Do not advance. I repeat, do not advance. On the other end of the channel, one of his operators, a man named Seth Farrow, 12 years in the business, said very quietly, "If it's WREN, Garrett. We were never the hunters here." Novak did not disagree. The blizzard intensified at 0430. Visibility dropped below 30 meters. The wind was no longer gusting. It was a sustained wall. A sustained howl that pressed against every exposed surface and made communication above a whisper nearly impossible. It was the worst possible condition for coordinated team movement and, for a single operator who had worked alone for 7 years and no longer required vocal communication to function, it was something close to ideal. She had moved twice more since the last shot. Her shoulder was beginning to register a deep muscle ache from holding position in sub-zero temperature for hours, not from any impact. The body's protest was legitimate, and she acknowledged it in the same way she acknowledged all discomfort, as data, not as instruction. She filed it, continued. Novak had consolidated his remaining 9 operators into 2 elements and was attempting to use the blizzard as cover for a slow push along the Eastern Valley wall terrain that offered overhead concealment and reduced her firing angles. It was the right call given his constraints. She had anticipated it might be his next move 40 minutes earlier and had repositioned accordingly. The eastern element moved in tight formation, intervals close because of visibility. A man named Roy Hennessy was on point. He was experienced, and he was moving carefully, checking every rock outcrop before passing it. But he was checking for a shooter who would be elevated, who would have a line of sight down the valley. He was not checking for a shooter already below him, positioned behind a natural stone shelf at ground level, angled up at 40 degrees. The shot took Hennessy in the leg rather than the torso. It was not an error, it was a decision. A downed operator created a care burden, a divided attention problem, a slowing of the element's momentum. She was not trying to kill everyone. She was trying to stop them from reaching the town. The eastern element broke apart, 2 operators going to Hennessy's aid, 1 going to ground and attempting a counter-targeting sweep. It was at that moment, while her attention was on the eastern element, that a round skipped off the rock face 18 inches to her left and threw stone fragments across her shoulder and jaw. She did not flinch. She had absorbed the impact, data graze, not penetration, no structural damage, and was already rolling to her secondary position within the shelf before the echo of the report reached her. Her shoulder stung. Blood was running along her jaw from a small stone cut. These things were real. She noticed them the way she noticed the wind, as conditions to account for. Seth Farrow, the man who had fired, was already repositioning. He was fast, and he was smart, and he had not announced his location with a second shot. She respected the discipline. She gave him 4 seconds to move, calculated the most defensible secondary position available to him from his last known point, and put a round through the rock face at the exact position he had just vacated. A near miss. A warning. She did not want Farrow dead. She wanted him stopped. At 0512, Novak's count was 4 operational, 3 incapacitated, 4 dead. He consolidated again. The formation that had entered the pass approach with tactical supremacy and every technological advantage was now 4 men in a blizzard, pinned by 1 shooter they could not locate, could not fix, and could not outmaneuver. At 0534, Novak did something that surprised her. He stopped moving. He got into a stable position behind a large granite formation at the base of the eastern wall, and he keyed the tactical frequency, the open channel, the one that didn't require knowing a specific contact, and he spoke. "I know you can hear this. I know you're working the channel discipline." His voice was controlled. "No theatrics. Tell me what you want." She had a radio. She did not respond. He tried again. "You've stopped us. I understand that. We're not advancing." A pause. The wind pressed against both of them with equal indifference. "Who are you protecting?" Silence. She had him on optics now. He had positioned well, a difficult angle, maximum cover on 3 sides, but the 4th side opened to a 40-degree window at 700 meters. She had him. The question was whether she needed to use it. "I know about the Ashfield program," Novak said. The wind almost took the words. "I know what they did to it. I know what they did to the people in it." He waited. "I'm not the enemy of the person you're protecting. I'm the employee of the person who wants her found. Those aren't the same thing." She stayed still. She waited. Novak was a professional, and professionals could lie with the same clean conviction they brought to everything else. But something in the framing was wrong for a lie. A lie would have offered her something, a deal, a way out. He had simply stated a distinction that benefited her nothing if true, and cost him nothing if false. It was an odd choice for deception. She keyed her radio once. Static. A signal. "I hear you. Nothing more." "Then you know I can't leave without completing the objective." His voice was matter of fact. No anger, no pleading. "And you know I can't complete it as long as you're operational. Which means we have a problem neither of us can solve through patience." He was right. She knew he was right. This was the part of the equation she had not fully resolved when she took the position, the terminal condition. She could hold them indefinitely in the blizzard. But blizzards ended, reinforcements could be called. The objective did not change. "Come out," Novak said. "Let's settle this between professionals. No more casualties." She thought about Irene Callahan in her kitchen. She thought about what Irene Callahan had built, and what it cost her to build it, and what it would mean if it disappeared into the snow tonight, along with the woman who compiled it. She thought about the 147 other people. Then she made the decision she had already made, the moment she climbed the ridge, the one she had simply been waiting to formally acknowledge. She stepped out from behind the stone shelf, rifle at rest, and walked into the open ground between them. Novak stood. His 3 remaining operators tracked her. She tracked all of them simultaneously, the way she always tracked everything, not by looking but by knowing where all the pieces were on the board at any given moment. If any of them moved wrong, she would have 2 shots in the air before they processed the decision. They all knew it. Nobody moved wrong. The 2 of them stood in the snow at 40 meters. The wind was a steady roar. The blizzard pressed everything flat. "Walk away," she said. Her voice was level. It was the first thing she had said in 4 days to another human being. "Take your people and walk away. Leave the town. Leave the woman. What she has documented will surface regardless. I've already made certain of that. The only variable is whether you and your remaining operators go home tonight." Novak studied her. She let him. She had nothing to hide in her expression. This was what she was, and she had made her peace with it a long time ago. "If the data is already out," he said slowly, "my objective is already failed." He was quiet for a long time. The blizzard made its noise. Then, something in his posture changed, not surrender, not defeat, but the particular recalculation of a man who had been handed a new set of facts and was integrating them cleanly. "Stand down," he said into his comms. "We're withdrawing." He looked at her one last time, not with hostility, with something closer to recognition, one professional to another, across a divide that was not quite a battlefield anymore. "Whoever you're protecting," he said, "they're lucky." She said nothing. She watched them leave. The relief convoy reached Varden's Crossing at 1,140 the following morning, when the storm had dropped enough to make the pass road navigable. It came in the form of 2 military vehicles, a medical unit, and Captain Drew Halstead, who had driven through the tail end of the blizzard on his own initiative, after a sleepless night of weighing what he had and had not done. The town was intact. Every person in it was alive. The 148 who had stayed were gathered in the community hall, drinking coffee and speaking in the low, careful voices of people who had been afraid for a long time and were still deciding whether they were safe. Irene Callahan was there too, in a corner chair, composed and quiet, her hands around a ceramic mug, her eyes tracking the new arrivals with the particular alertness of a woman who had understood exactly what was at stake and had not let herself fully believe until this moment that it had resolved in her favor. Halstead walked the approach route first, before entering the town. He had done enough field work to read an engagement site, and what he found in the snow told a story that took him 40 minutes to piece together. The positions. The casings, but only where she had chosen to leave them, and only the ones she had decided it was acceptable for someone to find. The angles of entry on the fallen operators, the drone impact site, the pattern of movement between firing positions, which he traced in the snow until he understood that what he was tracking was not a defensive response, but a planned, patient, methodical operation that had been conceived and executed before the Calloway group had set foot in the pass. He found one thing she had left deliberately: a single spent casing, set upright in the snow at the point where she had stood to face Novak. The cartridge head stamp had been partially filed away, all identifying data removed, but the caliber and profile matched a weapon system that had been exclusive to exactly one program in the military's history. Halstead picked it up carefully, turned it in his gloved hand. His radio operator, a young corporal named Brian Emmons who had grown up reading case files the way other kids read sports histories, came up beside him, looked at it, and went very quiet. "Is that Ashfield's specification?" Emmons asked. Halstead looked out over the snow, toward the ridge, where no footprints remained. The blizzard had seen to that. "WREN," he said. It came out as barely more than a breath. Emmons was quiet for a long moment. "I thought that file was closed." "The file is closed," Halstead said. "She isn't." He put the casing in his breast pocket and walked toward the town. He would write a report that described the Calloway group's withdrawal as a consequence of adverse weather conditions and tactical reassessment. It would be accurate in every detail that could be corroborated and vague on everything that could not. He had made up his mind about this before he reached the town. Standing alone in the snow above a battlefield no one had sanctioned, looking at evidence of a victory no one had ordered. Some things were better protected by silence than by documentation. She had found the cabin 2 kilometers east of the town, off the secondary trail that most people didn't know existed. It had been empty for 2 winters, a hunting cabin, stocked with the bare minimum, which was all she needed. The wood stove worked. The roof held the snow without complaint. She had used it twice before, in different seasons, for different reasons. She stripped off her outer layer first. The cut on her jaw had closed on its own, clean, shallow, no concern. Her shoulder was a different conversation. The deep muscle had seized in the cold and the sustained tension of the operation, and it took her 20 minutes of careful work, heat from the stove, and a level of patience she had cultivated over years of learning to treat herself as she would treat an instrument, with precision, without drama, with attention to what was actually there versus what she feared might be there. The rifle came next. She laid it across the table beside the stove and worked through the field strip with a methodical ease that was almost meditative. Bolt carrier, gas system, barrel, each component examined in the firelight for stress fractures, carbon fouling, the microscopic evidence of hard use in extreme cold. She had fired 23 rounds in the operation. The rifle had functioned without error through every one of them, in conditions that would have caused lesser weapons to fail at the seals, the mechanism, the optics fog. She cleaned it the way she always cleaned it, not because it needed it urgently. She had maintained it to a standard that made urgent cleaning unnecessary, but because the act of cleaning it was how she concluded an operation. It was the transition between what had just happened and what would come next, the ritual of care that closed one thing and opened the space for another. When the barrel was clean and the components were reassembled and the optics were wiped clear, she sat back and looked at the weapon for a long moment. There were no manufacturer's marks, no serial number, no unit designation. She had removed all of them years ago, when the concept of belonging to an institution that could mark her and track her and ultimately discard her had become something she was no longer willing to accept. But there were marks of a different kind. On the underside of the forestock, running the length of the grip channel, a series of small notches that were not part of the original manufacture, not a count of kills. She had never counted. Each notch corresponded to something else, a place, a person, a moment when the decision she had made had turned out to be the right one. Some of the notches were old enough that the wood had closed around them, darkened by years of oil and handling. She took the small blade from her kit and cut a new one. Careful, deliberate, exactly the width and depth of the others. Varden's Crossing. 148 people who did not know she had been there. An old woman with a careful mind and a kitchen full of truth she had spent 3 years assembling. The notch was not a mark of triumph. It was a mark of memory, the difference between what she did and what she was, made physical in the grain of the wood. Before first light, she was moving. The storm had passed. The sky above the Caro Pass was the particular deep blue that comes in the hour before dawn in high country, a color with no civilian equivalent, one that belonged entirely to people who spent enough time above the tree line to earn it. The snow underfoot was crusted and clean. Her breath came in measured clouds. She did not look back at the town. She had no unfinished business there. The work was done. Irene Callahan's documents had been transmitted from a relay point 20 kilometers away. The morning before the operation, she had done that first, before climbing the ridge, because it was the most important thing, and she had long since stopped allowing any variable she could control to remain uncontrolled. The woman, the data, the town, all of it was as safe as she could make it. She followed the secondary trail east, then angled north up through the old spruce line where the snow was loose and deep and her passage left no discernible track. In 4 hours, she would reach the high road. In 8 hours, she would be in the next province. In 2 weeks, maybe 3, there would be something else, another town, another person, another calculation that someone somewhere had made and gotten wrong. She did not know what it would be yet. She did not need to. This was the only thing she had ever been genuinely certain about in her adult life. That the world produced situations where one trained, careful, unaffiliated person standing in the